Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I'll be here with you today for just a few moments, because what I'm here to actually do is present an interview. I told you every once in a while we will be doing interviews on this podcast, and this is exactly one of those times. And this interview is fun and different. It's not going to be probably like a lot of other interviews that we'll have on this podcast, but I thought it was important to do it relatively early on to introduce you to what it can mean to open up the conversation around addiction. So I was actually going to be on this podcast called the Dopey Podcast. And instead, things didn't work out the way we wanted them to, and I'm going to hold off for the interview to let you guys listen to why, because it's a little mind-blowing and it's serious. So, take the time with this one, really pay attention and listen. But we have Dave from the Dopey Podcast here today with us. And we did a little video chat and talked about what has been kind of an upheaval in his life. And I really hope that you can listen to this episode with a mind towards maybe it's okay to open up my notions of what is okay and what is not okay, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, what is helpful and what is not helpful within the recovery context. Because look, people struggle with a lot of problems. We're going to talk to somebody who's addicted to drugs today, but people struggle with food, alcohol, drugs, gambling. Some of the people who come to me struggle with anxiety and they look at it as an addiction. Right? I'm addicted to anxiety. They feel like they almost seek it out. Codependency is like an addiction on somebody else's responses to you and what you can get from it. Addiction, if we broaden the conversation, is any habit that you engage in on a regular basis that you're having a hard time controlling, that is causing problems in your life, that you do and engage in and recover from for large amounts of times out of your day, right? Like that's why porn addiction is about the consequences that happen in your life, not just about watching porn. Love addiction, the same thing. Gambling. If you gamble every once in a while, that's not a gambling addiction. Gambling addiction is one where it hurts your livelihood, it hurts your family, it hurts it has real consequences for your life. And so I want you to open up your mind in terms of what is possible and pay attention to this interview. And, it was really brave of Dave to come on and have this conversation. And we go deep. We talk about a lot of things that are not that comfortable. He's from the more traditional side of things, but he just got shook up. And so the point of Ignited Recovery is to help people. I try not to be dogmatic about which way you should do it. I don't have a problem with AA if it works for you. I just know that it doesn't work for a lot of people and they need other options. I love Smart Recovery and LifeRing and SOS and all these other versions, HAMS and all these other versions of getting help. I offer my own, but I think it's more important than whether Ignited Recovery works, because I know that it does and it's doing it for hundreds of people, and that's amazing and it's wonderful and I love it. And I think hopefully through the Abstinence Myth book, it'll do that even more. But what we need to do is open up the conversation and just understand that there are other ways of doing this and that they're possible, and that if we put the effort forward, if we accept that our way of doing things does not have to be everybody's way of doing things, I think we'll be able to save a lot of lives, and we need it, right? 72,000 people died of overdoses in 2017, up from 60,000, right? That's up 10%, 20% from 2016, which was up from about 50,000 the year before. So we're up like almost 20% every freaking year. It's not okay. Something about our system's not working, right? Otherwise, we'd be winning this fight against these deaths, and we're not. So let's open up our minds, listen to this episode, check out the interview, and if you like what you hear, let us know. Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Podcast. And I'm Adi Jaffe. And today I've got Dave here with me. Dave from Dopey, which I'm pretty sure is the first and last time I will introduce anybody that way, unless Dave from Dopey comes back on. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Can I call you Adi or Dr. Jaffe?
Whatever. A D is good.
Adi. Are you Israeli?
I am. Yeah.
Nice.
Born and raised.
All right.
And man, I mean, first of all, just for the reason I wanted to just get right into this immediately here is I feel like just the story of us trying to connect to do a podcast by itself is a pretty damn good representation of addiction and what the fuck can go wrong in this world, period.
Sure. Tell the story, please.
Well, so I have, I've got my book that's just recently come out called The Abstinence Myth. And it's not a very traditional way of looking at addiction. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. But by writing a book and putting it forward, we were really trying to reach out to as many people as we could to get it covered. And look, a lot of people don't want to talk about this shit. They're like, fuck you. We don't want this anywhere around us. And you and Chris, as part of the Dopey Podcast, we're going to be one of our
targets.
Yeah, well, not
platforms.
Targets, like one of the ones that we actually connected to. We shot things to a lot of people. We were surprised by some of the people who actually responded with a yes, like Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye. I was on his podcast. Dr. Oz said yes, but literally as he started the podcast was saying, I never thought I'd be talking about this on my podcast. So for a lot of people, this was risque. You and Chris had a very specific kind of podcast. I want you to share more about that because people can still go and listen, obviously. And so we had planned it. It took a while. We had the thing scheduled. And I think literally like a week or two before we were scheduled to go on, something unexpected happened. And do you want to share a little bit from your standpoint, kind of when did this happen? A few weeks ago? A month ago?
Well, Chris overdosed and he died. I want to say maybe a month ago, maybe 5 weeks ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago. And I think that we were trying to hook up way before that. And we just run the most disorganized podcast you can ever imagine. And also because it was like, we did every episode together and Chris lived in Boston and I lived in New York and it was always like a clusterfuck to get together. And then whoever we could get on the show that night was kind of the show we were going to put out that week, which was fun. And we were excited to have you on because your story is pretty hardcore. Yeah.
I mean, again, when you sit in the rooms for long enough, you hear some pretty fucking crazy stories. So mine, I don't know where mine ranks in the order, but it's not one where people go, yeah, but maybe you just didn't have a drug problem. Maybe that's why you ended up this way.
Right. Yeah. There was no question about the meth and the saga, the Dr. Jaffe saga. Because Chris was like, why would we have this guy on the show? And I was like, well, because Chris wanted to be a psychologist.
Oh,
and
really?
I was like, yeah. And I was like, and you're a psychiatrist?
No. I have a PhD in psychology. I actually never finished getting my license, and I can explain why in a moment. But
I was like, Chris, he's like you. And Chris is like, well, is he an addict? And I was like, yeah, he's an addict. And Chris was like, oh, let's get him on then. And then, we because we are the way we are, we didn't get you on. And then out of no place, Chris overdosed and died. And just crazy. It's crazy for me. To lose him. He's a great friend, and we love doing the show. Yeah. And also, the show was about living in recovery. The show was about, the show we called it about drugs, addiction, and dumb shit. But the show was about living in recovery.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how long Chris was using, but for a little while, he was definitely lying on the show.
Yeah.
And lying to me. And I also did bring it to his attention. So it not that he was lying, but that he was not acting like himself. And was he using? You know what I'm saying? He did not, he was not honest with me. And, what I like to think is had he been honest with me, not only would we have recorded the best Dopey episode we ever had, but Chris would be alive. Yeah. And what a shame. And that's the only message I think that I can really send to anybody. It's if you want to die, then use silently by yourself and maybe you'll get lucky and you'll die. But if you just want to get high and you don't want to die, keep somebody in the know. Talk to people.
I mean, again, right off the bat, I think we're kind of linking up in terms of some of the deepest things. I'm showing you this. People won't see this, but it says fuck shame on it.
Sure.
And it's this bracelet that I wear, and that came from the TEDx talk, and this line that I wasn't even sure I was going to use. It was kind of like an ad-lib line last moment that made it into the talk. But I mean, I know the power of shame. Any addict knows the power of shame. But the reality is that anybody who's ever struggled with a mental health issue knows the power of it. And really, all humans know it, right? Because we've all struggled with shame at some point, and just some of us get literally buried by it. Some of us get so inundated with it that we can't peek our head out. And part of the reason I wrote the Abstinence Myth, and the reason I thought it'd be really cool to have you on now after the story is, you know, new data just got released. 72,000 people died of overdoses last year, 2017, 60,000 the year before that. We've had ongoing growth in the rate of losing people from drug addiction problems. It's been, you know, for decades and decades, we've been banging our head against the wall, and more people are dying every single year. And one of the reasons I wrote the book, and I said, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to just go out on a limb and just do this and just make myself a lightning rod if that's what ends up happening, is because my sense is everybody knows the system that exists now. I mean, again, Chris is such an incredible example of that, right? Because he was in it. He talked about it week after week. Like he knew all the things to do based on kind of the system that we have in place. But we know the statistics, and the statistics are that a lot of people, the vast majority of people won't go. They won't go to meetings. They won't go to traditional rehab. They just don't want it. And that out of the people that go, the success rates are variable. Some people are incredibly successful, and some people are horribly unsuccessful. And my thing was like, we got to do something. We have to do something to give people such a different option that some of the people who currently aren't going, or people maybe, and again, obviously I can't speak to anything that Chris would have done, but give people such a different option that even the ones who are kind of like, fuck, I've tried this 30 times and it hasn't succeeded, I'm just gonna stop trying, would go, oh, but that's different. That's different enough where I'm willing to dip my toe into it.
So what's the other option?
I mean, so great question. I mean, one of my first options, or one of the things that I really talk about primarily in the book, is the fact that I think we made a mistake by putting commitment to abstinence as essentially kind of like the first step. It's actually even before the first step, right? Because like even in AA, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop. So I did research when I was at UCLA, my postdoc research, and I did a study on people who were looking for treatment, and more than 50% of them said that an important or very important reason why they didn't enter treatment was because they enjoyed drinking and using too much to quit. And a lot of people were using that as evidence that those people weren't really serious about getting help or changing their life. I think there's a different answer. I think there's a bucket of people there. I don't know how big the bucket is, and we won't know until we keep doing more research on this sort of stuff. But there's a bucket of people out there that know their life is fucked up. They know it. They know they need help. They know they need to reach and connect. But they also know that the only answer everybody will give them is that they have to quit. And so they don't, because they're not ready for that answer. Or they don't want that answer. And right now we don't offer a lot of options that don't include that as part of the equation. And so one of the things that I say is we don't have to put abstinence as the number one entry ticket, right? Like to buy the ticket to join the ride, you have to commit to abstinence. And then the other one is I wish we'd start measuring success for people.
What's the entry ticket if it's not abstinence though? Like what do you say?
I mean, a commitment to recovery, and recovery is just, I want to be better. Like I actually want to talk about this a little bit. So you pointed out that like you knew something was off.
Yeah.
What was off? Like what could you tell was off?
Well, I guess the easiest thing to tell was that, Chris and I started doing the show 3 Septembers ago, so almost 3 years. We're coming up on 3 years very soon, the 3 years of the show. And we did the show as like a joke. We did the show because we had nothing better to do, basically. We did the show because I always wanted to have a show, and Chris knew that I'm like crazy with that kind of stuff. Like if I get a project, like I really go for it. I go after the project. We met in rehab.
Okay.
We met at a place called Mountainside in Canaan, Connecticut. And, I had been a heroin addict for years and years and years, and pills and weed and whatever, methadone, but I did every drug, but those were the drugs that I became dependent on. Chris was, he would say his drug of choice was IV Coke, but he was a heroin addict too. And he did everything too. Yeah. And, when I met him, I had an infant at home. Actually, I had an infant that left my home, and I had lost my family, and I had never been able to get my shit together. And I knew that when I met him, or that when I was in that treatment, that I had to get my shit together. Like that enough was enough, that I couldn't.
What was different?
I just couldn't. Well, the long story is I didn't get my shit together anyway. I wound up not getting my shit together then. But what was different was I could not handle the thought of being a using addict with a child. I couldn't handle the idea of being...
That was the red line for you.
Yeah, like being a child with a child, being useless. And I was 36 years old, but I was a child and I couldn't get anything done. And I was a drug addict. I was dependent on heroin. When I went into treatment, I was doing almost $300 or $400 a day. I was a mess.
It was like my meth habit.
Yeah, it was not good. And I had a little baby, and I had never had my shit together. You know what I mean? So that was the beginning of saying something has to change.
Yeah.
When I went that time, and me and Chris hit it off because we like to talk, and we were both of like minds, and we both had been around drugs for a long time. I was 10 years older than him, but we just connected. But it's not like we really connected because I left treatment. He stayed on there for months and months and months, and we would talk every few months. And I got clean for 18 months, and he got clean for maybe a year, and he relapsed, and he tried to take me down, and then I relapsed, and he got clean.
Tried to take me down. You mean he reached out to you and said, "Hey, you want to score and go get fucked up?"
Yeah, but it was funny. He was like, "Do you want to trip acid with me?" It was Christmas, and he was like, "Do you want?" It's we're two junkies, and he's like, "Do you want to go trip acid?" I was like, "No." It's no thing. I mean, I was clean, but it was the idea of tripping acid at that point was anathema to me.
Bro, I'm not clean. I'm not clean. It's been 12 years since I was 100% sober because I drink. And I've actually even tried other shit. But when people ask me if I want to do hallucinogens, I'm kind of I'm good, man. I did my hallucinogen shit when I was 18. I have the life I want. I don't really need some massive fucking bad trip to tell me where I'm going.
Yeah, I know that would topple the ship or potentially topple the ship.
Yeah, I don't want to. Now I have a life I love. I don't want to fuck with this.
My life, when he asked me, I didn't love my life. My life was fucked. I was I was in Narcotics Anonymous. I was white knuckling it to not use. I was not a happy camper.
So here's the issue, right? So here's the issue that I have, right? And I love that we're getting into this because, look, now you've been sober how long?
3 years and a few weeks.
Cool. So here's what bothers me about the version, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to be straight up. I'm not good at censoring myself. So, you were sober for 18 months, but before when we were talking, you said, but the thing was that I didn't get it. Right? When you were in rehab, you were talking about how.
Well, no, I was just trying to make it clear that I didn't get clean then and stay clean.
Right.
You know what I mean? It didn't happen in that moment.
Right. But here's my issue. Do you think that in those 18 months you hadn't acquired skills that allowed you to live those 18 months clean that were still super fucking valid even after you slipped?
No, I had no understanding of recovery in those 18 months. It just did not fucking penetrate my head.
They didn't.
It didn't penetrate my head. I wanted to get high every day.
Ah, okay.
There was no surrender. There was no serenity and surrender. It wasn't like that. It was I had this longing inside of me to use during that time. Can I
ask a question? You said you were miserable, that your life was miserable. What was miserable in your life?
I was separated from my wife and my daughter, and I felt like a failure because I didn't have them. I was a waiter. Basically, I was living a life I didn't want without my family. It was very
the reason to get clean anyway was to get your family back.
That was the idea. The idea was, no, I got clean not to get my family back, but to be able to be a father to my daughter, to be able to have custody, to be able to have visitation. I needed to show 12 months clean with a hair test.
Sure.
So I decided to get that 12 months clean.
But I'm saying that was so part of the purpose was I got to get this time so I can get my family back.
I got to get this time so I could see my kid without supervised visits.
Yeah.
You know, so I could be different than I've been the past 15, 20 years. You know what I mean? Like, I knew I needed to make a change. I just wasn't ready to make the change.
And you don't think that the fact that you were able to get those 12 months or 18 months showed that something in you changed over that time? You think you were the same person after that stint as you were as the person?
No, it was a process, and that was a mark in the process.
Right.
You know, that was like a huge. It was a huge learning period for me.
Yeah, and it sounds like one of the things that it taught you is, okay, I can stay clean for that long, but if I do it that fucking way, I'm so miserable. I might as well I got to figure something else better out.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm really interested in your thought, because like in my head, like, I mean, I have like advice I give people, and I like, you know, I try to, you know, I like encourage people to be as busy as they can. I encourage people to try to do whatever they wanted to do before they found drugs. And, but I've never, just seeing this happen to Chris and seeing it happen. I had another friend die this summer, another one of my best friends.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's been a fucking crazy. I also had a baby this summer. And I bought a house this summer. So it's been like a very, very long, wild and woolly summer. Yeah. But the point is, like, I don't know how to give what I have to anybody, you know, or
that's a great point. And just to be clear, none of us do, right? So you said, I'm really interested in kind of this thinking because you were just faced with disaster multiple times, and obviously you, as am I, are committed. That's part of the reason you recorded the podcast, was you're committed to trying to help. Like,
but that's like the funny thing about the show too. It's like, when we got to do the show in the first place, we weren't about helping anybody. The show was about, I wanted it to be a good show. I wanted it to be entertaining. And I knew that drug stories were funny. Yeah. And I knew that drug stories were crazy. And I knew Chris's were really funny and really crazy. And he was just a masterful storyteller. When we started doing Dopey, I had 4 months clean when we started doing Dopey. He had a year and a half. And like, it took, I think, 2 episodes, or no, maybe it was in the first episode, we copped to being sober. But at first we weren't sure the show was going to be about sobriety or recovery. We just wanted it to be the crazy drug stories, because there was no show.
So, okay.
That was just crazy drug stories. But then halfway through the first episode, I realized, like, because we are in recovery, we had to share that we were in recovery, or else the show is very irresponsible. Because it's not like we're going to stop doing the show and go get high. We're going to stop doing the show and go to a meeting. We're going to stop doing the show and talk about recovery. So it's like we had to share it. And then as soon as we shared it, the whole molecular structure of the show changed, and it became this recovery show about drugs. And what Chris always called it was like the rope-a-dope. And the Dopey stories brought you in, and then you got to be able to hear the recovery through the comedy, you know, which was a great theory until fucking Chris lied, used, and died. And now I'm not sure about the theory anymore, you know, because I'm still doing the show. I'm still doing the show without him.
It's making you question the underlying thesis.
Well, how to keep it dopey, because I love the show, but how to also encourage recovery without forcing it down anyone's throats, without being sanctimonious, without shaming anybody, with enjoying the stories. Because I mean, personally, you know, to be totally honest with you, I'm kind of tired of drug stories. Like, I'm up to my eyeballs in drug stories at this point. I like the stories that are just ridiculous early recovery stories that happened to us. Like, we were the worst drug addicts in the world, and now we're not drug addicts, and we come across like a moral like question, or like some weird thing happens. And I think those stories are so funny because they get loaded also with all of our baggage as addicts. Like, you're at the store and somebody thinks you stole something, but you didn't steal something. And it's just weird stories like that. Those are my favorite Dopey stories, because it's not like, you know, I mean, how many drug stories can you tell, and how many drug stories can you hear? And, You know, our audience lives for it though. So I feel like I'm kind of like.
But here's the difference. Something changed in you. Nothing changed in the stories. What changed is you now understand that those stories are just a single step on the way to a brand new life. And you want to hear the rest of the story because you now don't see those stories up to initially. At some point you pretended you behaved as if those stories, the drug using stories, were the story of somebody's life. But that's a little bit like believing the, you know, Cinderella story ends with happily ever after. It's fucking bullshit. Like, there's no happily ever after. Like, they ride into the fucking sunset, and what happened then, right? And you are now in the then part, especially facing what happened with Chris,
right?
Saying the story's not as fucking clean as we've been telling it. How do I make sure that people are getting the real deal, the real exposure, the real recovery? And first of all, I've got to agree with you 100%. And it's so, honestly, I think maybe through conversations like this, we get people to understand that there is no failure in relapse. First of all, if we can get that word out to people, that would be a huge fucking victory, man, because relapse is not a failure. People relapse for a reason. They relapse because they got triggered. They relapse because something happened in their life they couldn't handle. They relapse because something that used to be so connected, so intimately connected to their drug use came up for them in, we can talk about which ways, but in a way, at least one way. And then it triggered an entire set of behaviors that they didn't even know they needed to hold back because they hadn't dealt with it, or they just said, fuck it, right? Like, they just said, this is too much. I can't handle it. And in any other area of life, any other area, right? Like financial ruin, other mental health issues, cancer, right? Like, if somebody got a resurgence of their cancer after getting all the treatment and doing all the stuff and being in remission for 5 years, in no other area of the world would we look at that person and be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? But in addiction, we do it all the fucking time. We do it all the time. We're like, what the fuck is your problem? And then we wonder why people don't come up to us and say, hey, I've been snorting pills again. So the number one way that you can do it is, by the way, not all the stories, your story, the way I hear your story is very different than the way you, I think of it. I hear of a guy who didn't give a fuck, whatever, was using, was partying, didn't give a fuck, like did what he wanted to do. And then something happened. And that something that happened was you had a family, and it was your wife or your girlfriend that left you? Girlfriend. And she was like, fuck you, man, I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. And something hit and you went, oh shit, I don't want that. I give a little more of a fuck than that, but you had no idea what to do about it. And so you went and you tried to get help, and you kind of got a little bit of it, but not enough because you were doing it for them, which, by the way, I don't think that's a bad thing. You did it for the test. And you got just enough to do 18 months. Now, you can discount 18 months all you want, but
I don't. I had never gotten close to 18 months before that.
The dude who was using before would spit in your face if you told him that you could be sober for 18 months. And then I don't know what happened after 18 months, but something happened. Maybe even all that happened was the buildup of not getting your family back, not getting your daughter back, not getting the reason you did all this stuff for. It built up and it built up, and the resentment built up. And one day you're like, fuck them then. I'm going to go use again. Because the anxiety and the shame and the destruction that you had brought on yourself over time was just too much to bear. And you knew a way to deal with it. You knew that using would get you back on track and you'd feel okay. But then it happened. And I don't know, how long were you back out using for?
Well, it didn't exactly happen like that. But what happened was I decided that I wanted to smoke weed again.
Okay.
I miss smoking weed. And I decided that, like, maybe I could be this kind of addict who could smoke weed successfully, because I love weed and I love I love the subculture. I love the culture. I love getting high. I love looking at it, smelling it, eating it, whatever.
But just a second, just right before you decided to smoke weed, and like, how long had you been talking about it? How long had you been thinking about it?
Every day. I never wasn't thinking about it. It was a daily thing. Yeah, I was like, this is all fine and good, and it's good that I'm not fucking hooked on heroin, and it's good that I'm not hooked on pills, and it's good that I'm not having seizures and at the methadone clinic. But I miss smoking bud. Like that's, I think I probably said that exact phrase like 10 times a week. Okay. So by the time it was Hurricane Sandy had hit New York, and I had seen a friend who was a stoner, and I was just like, fuck it, I'm going to smoke weed. And I started smoking weed again. And the truth is, after I started smoking weed, like I didn't, run back to heroin, and I didn't run back to pills, and I didn't, like, my life didn't fall apart. I didn't lose my job. I didn't lose my apartment. I really enjoyed smoking, but then slowly but surely things started to creep a little bit. Like I shot dope. First I met a girl who like sold weed, and I was like involved with her. And then I met a girl who would come over with pills, and I was involved with her. And I would get pills like once a month. I'd get like a handful of pills. Yeah. And I did that like for months, maybe the whole time. Like I'd get 5 or 6 pills a month or something.
Yep.
And then I took a couple Percocets for a few months in a row, and I was like, I missed that feeling. I was like, maybe I'd like to do dope again. So I had a dope dealer come over, and I did dope one time. And I was like, I don't want to do that. It was just, it was so strong. Like, it was just heroin you have to really condition yourself for. And like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, trying to condition myself.
I know. I remember telling a friend of mine, like, I don't want to take a drug that I have to get used to before I get fucking high off of it. Like, I want the shit to feel good the first time. Well,
it was very much like that. And so I did that once, and I had this lifestyle, and I was still very productive. I was very creative. I got to see my kid every week. But I was smoking weed every day, and I would take pills a few times a month. And then I kind of had the option to reconcile with my girlfriend. And she found out that I'd been taking pills, and she like freaked out, and she was like, this is not going to happen. And then she was like, you're losing custody again because you're not clean. You're not just smoking pot. You're taking pills while you have the kid in the house. And I was like, kind of like, but, and I remember I was like, but, grasping at straws, like, can't, blah, blah, you know what I mean? And I was like, and then something just happened. And I was like, what the fuck am I doing? I'm fighting for this thing that doesn't really do all that much for me anyway, and I'm fighting so hard to hold on to this child that I liked, not my child, me. I was fighting so hard to hold on to this piece of me that was terrified to deal with life.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I totally do. I totally see what you're saying. And so, again, like what I see is this dude who was at the bottom and got a little bit better because of the rehab, and it kind of puddled along, and then it kind of maybe started going down a little bit more. And then the shit hit the fan, like dumped down a little bit and went back up. Like, I see a path, right? I see a journey. And my question is, what can we do? My question when I wrote this book was, what can we do to open people up so they can enter the journey at whatever fucking point they're ready to enter it at, right? Like, I don't know the answer for me, by the way, because I was sober for 3 years in AA. I don't know the answer for you because you went through your path. So kind of relying on our stories to tell this is a little hard because we have our stories, and it's hard for us to imagine life going any other way, right?
Well, it went the way it went.
Yeah, exactly. But like, I'll tell you, for instance, I have a story that I talk about all the time. A client of mine who actually gave me a testimonial, so I get to use her name. Her name is Julia, and actually she might actually even come on one of these shows with me once to talk about her story. But she was a heavy, heavy drinker. She used to party too when she was younger, but like by the time I saw her, was a heavy drinker initially every night of the week. And then the best she could do, she went through her journey, the way that you described for yourself. And the best it got for her was like only heavy drinking 3 to 4 nights a week. And then most weekends, like blacking out. Mm-hmm. If her husband was in town, for sure blacking out, right? Because they would go out and celebrate, etc. She tried everything that she could. And the thing, she wouldn't walk into a meeting. She had been to one that fucking disgusted her. She never wanted to walk in again. And the reason she found me was a referral from a friend who just told her she was trying something called the Sinclair method. I don't know if you know what that is, but she had heard that I work with people who do this sometimes. It's a medication-based approach. And she reached out to me. She said, look, I don't need therapy. I've been to therapists. I've been to counselors. I've been to psychologists. I'm good. Life is great. I just drink too much. And I want to see if you can help me with that. And I said, cool. I know I can help you with the drinking, but I just want to be clear about one thing. And that is, when I help you with the drinking and you drink less, shit's going to come up. You might think you're fine, but shit's going to come up when we deal with the drinking. If you're not willing to deal with it, we don't have to deal with it right now, but we'll deal with it when it comes up, because otherwise, no matter what I do to your drinking, something will come back up. And we worked for a while. There was a lot of background stuff in her family. I mean, there was, we all have our stories, right, of what happened in our life earlier. Long story short, she was able to reduce her drinking substantially, like to the point where she was drinking a couple of times a month. And maybe one of those, she was drinking more than like 1 or 2 drinks. She had 3 or 4 on those nights, and the rest were okay. But every once in a while, she would have a binge, right? In traditional treatment, the way most of us talk about treatment, the whole time she was failing treatment.
Right.
But the whole time she was drinking like 15, 20% of what she had drank for years beforehand. And so in my model, it was a success because she was getting better. She wasn't where she wanted to, but she was getting better.
How's she doing now?
She's doing great. It's actually really, really funny. So she, at some point in the middle, decided to completely quit drinking, right, of her own. She was down to this path of her own. The thing they always tell you will never happen. An alcoholic will never give up their alcohol. She did it on her own, gave it up. And then she had some terrible losses in her family, just like you had mentioned, but like really, really close to her mom, etc. And fell off the wagon. She was so embarrassed about it. She had a hard time coming to me to talk about it because it felt like a failure again, right? Mm-hmm. She finally did reach out after about a week and a half. And we talked and I said, you're not failing. Your fucking mom just died. Like, let yourself grieve in whatever way you need to. Stay safe. Let yourself grieve in whatever way you need to. Do not feel bad about the fact that you're having a fucking hard time that your mom just died. And we'll be okay. And 4 days later, she writes me and says, thanks a lot for that talk. I'm going to put away the alcohol for a while. I got to deal with my family and talk to the rest of the people in my family. And she's been good since. And that was now 6 months ago. The difference between her story and your story is just in the perception.
Well, I mean, I have no problem with anything that, and anybody the way they live, I'm happy that they live it their way. You know what I mean? Who am I to tell anybody anything? I just know that for me, when I finally and I think, I am I do 12-step recovery.
Sure.
I did it because I could not get my life to be better than it was.
I get it.
And I showed up, I was around 12-step recovery for fucking ever. And I never felt particularly attached to it. And I never felt particularly connected to it. But I went one morning, it's a Saturday morning on Houston Street in Manhattan at the YMCA at 7:30 in the morning. And I told, I shared about my family and I shared about how upset I was and all this shit. And this old man from New Zealand, this old painter, he was like, we would love it if you would come back every day. And that was the first time anybody was like, we want to see you at a meeting. I was always on the outside of it. So I was like, all right, I'll come back. And I know, what's that sound? Now I hear something. What's that sound? I'm just kidding. It's fine.
Sprinklers.
I'm like, the thing they say in 12-step is rarely have we seen somebody, vigorously attempt what we're doing and fail. And I said to myself, I've never really attempted it, but I really need to be sober and I'd really like to be happy, and I'm going to do what is suggested, and I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid because I never did before. And I always was like, these guys are fucking weirdos. They're cult members. They scare me. They're creepy. I don't want to be like them. But I also didn't want to be miserable being like, why can't I smoke pot? So I did what I was told. And I also I didn't have an alcohol problem, but I still dealt with that fellowship because I just wanted the solution. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. So here's where I think our stories jive. I was in the same readiness place when I walked into that second rehab after I'd failed out of the first rehab for using, a very similar kind of story, and said to myself, fuck, I can't get kicked out again. I'll end up going to prison for 13 years. And so I stayed clean in that second one. I got to be honest with you. And again, just to be clear to anybody listening right now, I never suggested anybody leave something that is working for them. I think you found something that works for you, hallelujah and amen, and keep it up. But what I'm saying is the parallel for sure between both of our stories is when you walked into that room, something had changed and you were ready to just do whatever the fuck you had to do.
Yeah,
as
for
was
sure.
I. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road. We have to get people to that place. And some people get to it in a meeting. All I'm saying is, for the people who don't, it's our job. I came up with one way of doing it, and that's what I outlined in the book. But it's our job to come up with additional ways for people to tap in, to just be willing to go. Because a lot of I'm not hearing this from you, but a lot of my AA friends, their response to people who say, I don't want to go, the response is, just go to a meeting. And it's like, we end up resisting the people who are asking for help. And I'm saying, just give them another fucking option. Because I'm telling you, like 40 to 50% of the people that I work with decide to quit. It's not that they don't want abstinence. It's they need another fucking door in. Let's just build more doors is kind of my whole method.
The thing that scares me, it's like you said something in terms of like, and this is just, a fear I have and where I'm at with this whole thing now. And just, I'm not a judgmental person. I have my opinions. I mean, I guess I can be judgmental, but I don't give a shit. Everybody should do whatever the fuck they want to do.
Sure.
But like you talked about, if somebody relapses, that they didn't fail, and I say, no, of course not. Because we're born to relapse. You know what I mean? Like, we're born to lose. We're born to fuck it up. That's the nature of the addict. But when the relapse turns into death, and the relapse turns into not, oh, I fucked up, or oh, I can't believe I did it again, but it turns into, you're never coming back, and you're never going to see your kid again. You're never going to see your wife. You're never going to see your family. You're never going to go back to the doctor, and the doctor's going to say, you could do it this time. It's like, that's a serious potential experience to happen. And at that point, I'm not calling Chris a failure. I'm just calling him a tragedy. This is a fucking tragedy. And like, if you can avoid a relapse and you're going to take another drink, you're not going to fucking die. But if you're fucking with heroin,
I get it.
You can, I hated when people would tell me, I know I can use again, but I don't know if I have another recovery. And Chris used to say it on the show, and it happened. And I'm just like shocked.
So it did. And we got to wrap up soon, because I always told people I want to keep these ones somewhat short. And
no, right on. That's
we
cool.
went long, but this is such an important discussion. Here's my point. Chris knew everything about traditional recovery
and non-traditional recovery. He knew he was a monster for this shit.
You made it your life, right? It was the thing you've done for the last almost 3 years. There was no question about whether or not he understood the current way people deal with this. And
with him, he had been to 20 rehabs. He had 3 years over and over again. He had 4.5 years this time. He had been in and out of treatment since he was fucking 16. So he had a lifetime of this
Here's
stuff.
the issue that I have. I get the fear, man. I get it. And you just lost 2 people. It's serious shit. I've lost three of the people I've worked with over the last 10 years died. And you feel it in every fucking bone of your body when that shit happens. The issue is this. If we understand that people also get lost in this system, in the current system that recommends abstinence, like you have to quit. If you don't quit, you're going to die. People still end up relapsing and using. So
of course.
The problem with just listening to our fear is, I think, like, what we're trying to do is play it safe. We're trying to say, you see, but he did something we told him not to do. And my question, and I know neither of us can answer this question, but I just want to put it out there. You hear these stories, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Corey Monteith, Chris, like these people, they'd been to treatment, they've been sober for a while, and then they fell off. The way the system currently works, the only time they can come back in is when they can say, I want to quit again, I'm done. There was something in Chris, I don't know what it is, and I wish we could have figured out what that is, obviously. Like, that's the biggest thing, right? But there was something in Chris that needed to use and didn't feel comfortable telling people about it. What if there was another door where people didn't say you have to quit, and that's a door he would have felt comfortable walking into? I don't know if it is or isn't, but the current door, the door where people say you've got to quit to come back, he wasn't comfortable walking into, right? Like, we know that.
No, I think that with him, and he said it to me, he said it on the show a million times, there was no moderate using for him.
Sure.
Like he couldn't just use a little bit. He couldn't just, sniff a little fucking heroin once a week. He had to shoot all of it, and the coke and the meth,
Yeah.
That's the way he was. And there was no a little bit for him. And he knew that. And he knew that if he used again, this could happen. I just didn't believe it could happen like that.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I think that any method to get to a place where your life is of a higher quality, good for you. I'm just saying, like, I know that I've found incredible relief in sobriety. Like,
absolutely.
I found incredible relief in abstinence, but like, I support you in whatever you want to do. You know what I'm saying? Like,
no, I get it. And this wasn't like a fight or a debate.
A debate.
I think for me, look, it's pretty clear to me, like, again, I think there are a lot of people that are trying to do good. And I'm of the opinion that if we just start joining forces and saying, look, what do you want, man? Like, if you're not doing well, here's a fucking menu of shit you can do tomorrow to start getting better. I have a feeling, and again, it's a feeling, that there will be more people who will say, okay, well, I don't want that. Fuck you people. But that thing is the one that I'm psyched about. And I don't know if we save one life or 50, but whatever we're doing right now is just ending up in the situation where we're losing more and more people every year. And I just want more options. And first of all, I want to thank you for coming on. I mean, I know this has been a really tough time for you in general. And I think people need to hear these stories, right? Like, recovery for two people sitting in the same space doing the same thing who met in rehab can look completely different ways. And I think we need to honor Chris's story for his struggle, for whatever he was struggling with, because he didn't go back to using because life was fucking great and he just wanted to use again. Something was going on for him. Right.
Well, we'll never know the answer to that question. But thank you very, very, very much for having me also. And if any of your people want to check us out, you should go to www.dopeypodcast.com.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave. We'll have a link to that. And
awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. And, I only wish you the best, and I wish your people the best as well.
Thank you so much, Dave. And congratulations on your new kid.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. I hope you liked that interview with Dave. I mean, that was powerful. No matter which side of the fence you sit on, that was a powerful conversation. I'm so, so grateful for Dave for coming on and being able to share his story, his struggles, what's going on with, after the death of his partner, and just the pain that he's suffering with, and the questioning and the work that he's going through in his head. I think it's really brave of him to share that here. As I mentioned before, Ignited Recovery is trying to help people. My goal is to help 1 million people beat their addiction. And I'm doing that through the book, The Abstinence Myth. If you haven't picked it up yet, pick it up. It's available on Kindle and through paperback. And just finished recording the audiobook version, so that'll be up soon. And we have even more really, really cool things in the works for you. We also have the Ignited Recovery online course that, if you're struggling with addiction yourself, or somebody, sometimes that's the easiest thing to do. You don't have to walk into rooms to admit that something's wrong. You don't have to make appointments. You can do it on your time. It's cheaper than any rehab you've ever heard of in your life. And we have these weekly chats every week for the people in the course. Everybody has their video off because sometimes you just don't want to show your face when you're struggling with that stuff, and that's okay. We'll talk about the research I used to do at UCLA. Shame is a barrier for people about getting into help. I don't need to make people more ashamed. I want to make them less ashamed and fix that for them. Any way that you need to interact, any way that you need to connect, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, Twitter. Hit us up. Hit me up at Dr. Adi Jaffe on all those channels. Ignited also has groups, etc. We need to make a change here. We need to be able to beat down the struggle, save some lives, get some people better. I don't really care what the method is. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this episode, hopefully you'll leave us a review. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful, and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.